So thank you everybody for joining and for being here with us at this new sustainable nutrition series on the sustainable nutrition platform of competitor.eu, where you can find all the information about sustainable nutrition. What do we mean about sustainable nutrition? Is that in a world with 7.6 billion people, 7.6 billion people, where just a small minority lives in Europe, and people are hungry and they want food, and they have the right to get food and they have the right to prosper. But we try to do this in a sustainable way, and that's the challenge. I have a thrilling panel here with me that I will present very briefly. We have Hugo-Maria Schally from the European Commission. We have Gaia Taffoni from Science for Democracy, Danielle Arancibia from that's coordinator Latin America for ProForest, and then we have Gert van der Bijen from Solidaridad, and then from the Tropical Forest Alliance we have Felipe Carasso, and then myself, who I'm Pietro Paganini. What's the challenge? Today is the Earth Day, and I'm very pleased that we have actually Miss Earth here, that is Gaia. Gaia, you know, Taffoni. I want to celebrate you also because Gaia is in ancient Greek the name of the Earth, and it was the divinity of Earth. So it's a pleasure to have you here to celebrate the Earth Day. We have decided to focus today on deforestation, and deforestation is, of course, something that is happening right now, that has always happened, and we want to see what science says about deforestation. Don't forget that our approach in the Sustainable Nutrition Platform is to avoid any ideological or religious approach to environmental issues and to use science and scientific-based fact. Let me start with a very provocative question. Do the planet needs to be rescued? Well, the planet doesn't need our help. The planet has been fine. The planet is fine. The planet will be fine. On the contrary, we should ask how we are on the planet, and probably we're not doing very well, and our impact on the planet is not as good as it should be, and particularly the speed of how we are impacting on the planet is a bit terrifying, and we should be very much concerned. And today, Earth Day is very useful exactly for this, to think about how we can contribute to make this world a better place. And there is, of course, the issue of deforestation. In the sustainable nutrition, we have covered many problems that are related to nutrition and to sustainability. And today we have decided to focus on deforestation. But of course, deforestation is not the only problem that concerns our planet. There is one, and we have launched, and let me take 1 minute to tell you about this. There is one that is probably even worse than deforestation, and it's what is happening beneath the level of our ocean. And I call it oceanization or deoceanization. That is the destroying of the oceans. And we are really killing our ocean because of illegal fishing, industrial fishing, and because when we talk about sustainability on Earth, we cannot really talk about sustainability on the oceans. And please just take today to reflect about what we're doing to our sharks, to our whales, and to the incredible biodiversity that is beneath the level of the ocean. It's important that we care about forests. It's important that we care about biodiversity on Earth, but actually we are forgetting about our oceans. So let's have a thought about that. But let me start with deforestation. There's many things happening. There's many words. There's many solutions. The European Commission has talked very much about deforestation, and this year, important things are happening inside this big framework of the Farm to Fork. But the question is are the European policies going to be effective? Are the European policy going to have an impact on those countries that are actually contributing the most to deforestation? And recently, thanks to the Global Forest Watch, we saw some scaring data. But on the contrary, also saw some positive data. And it's important to start also from the positive data. I was surprised to see that Malaysia or Indonesia, that are often accused of devastating forests, for the past 5 years have been actually improving. Thanks to what? To very wise and smart policy that has slowed down the deforestation process. Is that enough? Probably is not enough. Much more needs to be taken, and we need to elaborate policies, but we also need to elaborate schemes like certification schemes. And I like to remember the RSPO, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. That was one of our guests in the most recent event that we held. Those certifications are probably not perfect. They need to be improved, but they are very much helping to exactly improve the quality of our life on this planet, and also balancing our role on this planet. I'm not a fan of Pope Francis, but he wrote something very smart in his last encyclica when he said, sustainability is a delicate balance between human needs and the environment. And what we want to do, what we like to contribute here also today or during our work, is to find that balance, balancing the different rights of human beings. Don't forget, 7.6 billion, and we are turning 10 billion, and we are all hungry. We need nutrients. We need kilocalories every day. And for getting these nutrients, we need land. And in order to get this land, we need plantation, we need farming, we need cattling. The question is, how can we make this sustainably? And that's why we are here. But I'm consuming, as we say at Competitor, I'm consuming too much oxygen on my own and producing too much CO2. So let me go straight to our speakers, and I want to start right away going to Costa Rica, and this is a real global event, and thanks to the internet. And we have Felipe Carrazzo from the Tropical Forest Alliance. Just housekeeping, this event is being recorded. In a few days, we'll be up on our website, the Competitor website, with all the bios. So I'm not going to read the incredible bio of these beautiful speakers. You can see them online, of course, on our website. There is a question and answer section where you can post your question. And as well, there is a chat where you can leave your messages or even tell us about your initiative. It's important that we use our platform to promote your initiative as well, to reinforce and to support sustainability. Felipe, you are Tropical Forest Alliance, so probably you are the best person to talk about forest and deforestation or reforestation, as we saw in the case of Indonesia and Malaysia. And then we will move to Colombia, where we see how the situation instead is in South America, where numbers are not turning up so well. Felipe, the floor is yours. I know you have a presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Pietro. Greetings to you, to Hugo, Daniel, Gad, and Gaia. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And I would love to add a bit to the reflection that I think as humanity we should have on today's celebration, but also, I'll say, concern, right? Because there's still a big challenge that we need to tackle collectively. So please let me share with you some slides building upon what you mentioned, Pietro. The latest information regarding deforestation. Our partners of the Global Forest Watch, an initiative led by the World Resource Institute, is doing an amazing job of trying to keep numbers updated as best as possible in terms of deforestation. The Competitor invitation talked about 12.2 million deforestation for 2020. This comes from the analysis of the Global Forest Watch. 4.2 of those 12.2 million hectares lost in 2020 are related to tropical forests. It's important to note that despite the fact that as humanity, have put a lot of attention to this year or last year and this year as critical years to turn the tide on how we address land use change, we still have a level of increase on deforestation. 19 and 20, the last 2 years, you see a tendency of going up. Of course, probably the pandemic has played a role, but it goes beyond that. Now, within the context of tropical forests, there's a series of countries in the tropics that we know are addressing this issue or being affected by the issue. However, as you flagged, and as the Global Forest Watch team denominates, there's some bright hot spots. And what's happening in Southeast Asia is worth giving an eye on, right? Now, deforestation is not generated only, generated by many, many factors, right? There's many elements. And I think that we have to be honest that commodity-driven deforestation continues to play a very high level of impact. Now, this gets distributed differently across the board, right? In regions like Southeast Asia and Brazil, and I'll let Daniel speak more about Brazil, but and South America as a whole, the Amazon, I would say that commodities play an important role, as you see out of this map, while in places like the tropical forest in Africa, the subsistence agriculture has an important level of impact. This is relevant because strategies to address the problem differ, right? Now, when we have a closer look at what's going on into places like Southeast Asia, and harder to capture the information, but through good and detailed effort, researchers have been able to start to flag and link the impact to the different commodities when we're looking at the commodity-driven deforestation. And this is extremely useful because with a more triggered approach and a higher level of traceability, it's possible to go more granular in the way you set up the strategies to address deforestation. Now, what I would love to flag is that not only we have to look into the impact behind the deforestation, but also try to figure out what are the drivers that lead to a control of deforestation and hopefully to a diminishment of that deforestation. In Southeast Asia, the Tropical Forest Alliance has conducted in 2020 with the support of our partner Diameter a thorough analysis trying to find out which are the areas of progress that have led to these bright hot spots to advance positively over the last decade, and what are the drivers behind those so that we can look out for elements that shed light on the way we can go about the solutions, upscaling those solutions, mainstreaming those solutions within the different set of parameters that interplay on the matter. It's important that we understand the relevance of looking at these drivers of progress and not only at the causes of impact so that we can fend out the world trends, right? When we go into our research and see the case in Indonesia, it's clear that the progress, there's many things that have led to progress, but there's 6 drivers of progress that are interrelated. Primarily, you have a combination of action from private companies that have taken lead. There's been an overhaul of the policy approach from the governments, and there's been, and probably activated by a very constant and dynamic interplay generated by the civil society organizations. So collectively, all these forces have aligned to create this impact. But when you look at beyond those 2 primarily drivers, you see other drivers that interplay. And this is where the banking and investment sector comes in. The consumer country governments, how they interplay comes in, and how the global community markets affect this. So, for example, we know that the crude palm oil prices are still low, and in a way that might have played an important role on the diminishment of impact. How can we manage that moving forward in such a way that it doesn't revert, right? Or not necessarily the prices, but the deforestation associated to a higher demand. The demand it's growing tremendously. we are about to launch a study out of a TFA looking at the future of forest commodities. Demand for soft commodities has doubled over the first 20 years of this century. So if that trend continues, there's still going to be enormous pressure. And I conclude saying that this is extremely relevant because the way we do the design and architecture of our policies has to envision that we're not isolated, that connections are occurring across the board, and that we need to make sure that policies help diminish the gaps that are generating a polarization that delays the implementation of an agenda. North to south divide, the market to producer divide, the public to private distance, and the development to environment dichotomy. So these settings will hopefully, by looking at drivers of progress, we can get better policies to address conditions under this scenario. Over to you, Pietro, so that we can continue the conversation with
Thank you. Thank you so much, Felipe, for this meaningful presentation and for some of the data, some made available by the Global Forest Alliance, Global Forest Watch, sorry, but you are the Tropical Forest Alliance. And very interesting because you focus on exactly what we want to discuss here, which are, or what are the drivers of deforestation. And you mentioned some commodities, and we're quite surprised to see that, for instance, palm oil in Indonesia and Malaysia has a very limited impact on deforestation. That contradicts or contrasts with the discussion there, or the agenda, or the topics that we have here in Europe, where it seems that palm oil is one of the main causes of deforestation. So it's important to have this kind of information to design correct policies. Let's move to actually South America, and let's move to Daniel from ProForest. Daniel has an incredible long experience in how to improve forest and reforestation, and has 10 years of experience at the WWF, so probably the best person to be here with us. And Daniel this morning sent us an email where, in a shy way, it was sort of admitting, look, here in South America is not going as well as we expected. I was actually thinking the countries like where you're based, Colombia, are doing well. Instead, you were saying they're not. Why? What are the drivers? What are the commodities that are driving this deforestation? And we'll see later on what can be done to stop this or to slow it down.
Thank you, Pietro, and thanks for inviting all of us to this conversation. I think my point is that there are signs of hope, but we need facts to back it up and to plan ahead. But there are also worrisome trends, and we need to understand what is going on in our countries with the context. Latin America as a region is a very diverse region, and we have to understand what is going on, what are drivers of pressure, what are drivers of deforestation, what are the drivers of forest degradation, and try to act together. I think my first message is that when we come to discuss about sustainable food systems, the most important piece is that sometimes we are very focused on a piece and not looking at the whole system, and what we need to do is act together for system change. I think that's part of the last points that Felipe made, is that there is not one silver bullet, there is not one single actor that is the only one to blame for things that happen globally. Things move and change in every country, and that's the important thing. You asked me for this first piece, Pietro, to talk about the Amazon, and the Amazon, for everybody, is a beautiful place. 1/3 of the biodiversity of the world is there. 1/3 of the 3 species live there. Is, people say, solutions to our current situation will come from the biodiversity that is in our rainforest. The Amazon is a big piece of that. However, it's not going well to the Amazon. Last year, 2020, was the worst year on deforestation that we saw for the region as a whole. And I think that's very important to put in context of what happened, because a lot of people mentioned that it's related, for example, to specific commodities, and it's not necessarily specific, related to a specific commodity, but overall to the enabling conditions of governance of those territories. Pietro, I'm not sure if you can enable me to share a screen. I have just...
Give me a second. I was reading all the questions that are popping in. There is Peter Van Dijk that is very excited about making questions. Let me see where you are, Daniel.
Perfect. You know,
give me a second. Yeah, turn on the audio. Yes, wonderful. Now you can share your slides.
Perfect. So just to put in context, last year we lost 2.3 million hectares of forest in the Amazon, of primary forest. We're not talking about any kind of land use change from other type of land covers. It's just primary forest.
Are you sharing the slides because we don't see them?
It still says that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Hold on.
So,
no, I want you. Okay, let's try now.
Okay, super. Thank you. Good. So, just to put in context, as I was mentioning, this last year we lost 2.3 million hectares. I don't know if you can see my screen now, Pietro. These 2.3, well, perfect. So just for you to know that, you know, this is what I'm living here now today in Colombia. This is the whole Amazon. What you see there in blue is what represents 2.3 million hectares, more or less, of what was lost. Just for you to have an idea, 2.3 million hectares is more or less the size of a country that we have in Latin America that is called Belize. And it looks like, you know, it's not that much, but to put in perspective for our colleagues that live in Europe, if you put it in Europe, this is the size of Amazon that was lost. It's not the whole rainforest that was lost in the world. It's just what was lost in the Amazon. That is the size, is a little bit less than Belgium, but that is the size of the territory that completely lost its primary forest cover. That's what happened just last year. Why? And you know, Felipe already shared some of where that deforestation has been located. This is a great project that is financed by the Norwegian Corporation, and I hope that more organizations like that could keep these type of projects going on, where you can see where the deforestation is concentrated. And just let me very brief, 65% of all that forest lost happened in Brazil. A lot of that is associated with cattle pasture, but not cattle pasture necessary for big businesses, but it's small fragments that have been lost. Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru recorded their highest ever loss. In Bolivia, a big part of that loss was people cutting down forests and burning it, and then putting some kind of commodity. And again, that goes to my point about governance of territories. Why? Because a lot of these movements is about land speculation, land grabbing, not necessarily for producing a commodity and an agro-industrial scale. And that's very important, that for each country, the governance system of each country is so important. If you see Peru, my home country, a lot of the deforestation is very tightly associated with infrastructure, road development, electric lines. Where you have a road into the Amazon and electric line up, you start seeing that on both sides of the road, deforestation starts because it's part of the economic development pattern. So governance is super important to discuss at every country before we move on to the next step, that is who's to blame. I think the situation in the Amazon in general is very complex to single out any single participant. In Colombia, for example, all this where the deforestation is concentrated has a lot to do with territories that have been, after the peace process, have been out of control of armed groups, and therefore there has been a power vacuum, and then a lot of illegal forces have taken over some pieces of this territory and start this conduct of land grabbing, which means, how do I get control over this territory? I cut, I burn, I put some pasture, I put a couple of cows, and then I claim possession over this territory and start producing something else. So this is very small, very fragmented, and it has to be analyzed in the overall context. Colombia, because you have mentioned, just to keep talking about Colombia, because you have mentioned what is going on, this is what I think the Amazon at some point, it has to get a balance between what is designed for production that has to be concentrated in some areas with sustainable intensification, with proper control, and then areas that need to buffer us to keep our natural capital standing, where governments, multilaterals, and international organizations can also collaborate to keep this standing. In the Amazon, for example, 41% of the Amazon is in the hands of either protected areas that belong to the government or indigenous territories. Already government says that they don't have enough capacity and funds to manage properly all those protected areas. And when it comes to indigenous territories, the situation is more dire. Indigenous territories need more help to be able to properly manage their own territories. And that's why, for me, it's very important that, for example, today on Earth Day, we also see starting the Global Climate Summit convened by the Biden administration, because it also gives a space to talk about other solutions that are not just among governments, but for example, with indigenous nations and First Nations and indigenous peoples, which I think play a big role on how do we manage deforestation in this particular case in the Amazon. Now, if you talk, for example, you mentioned, for example, palm oil, and I would love to, for people that don't know Latin America and that are always thinking about palm oil like big deforestation holes. For example, my home country, Peru, palm oil came there to the Amazon, but because it was a crop that replaced coca. There was a lot of coca growing, and the government with the United Nations decided that how to change these growers that were making a lot of money with an illicit crop, and they start trying a lot of different tropical crops, and palm oil came as a replacement. And you can see 85% of the production of palm oil in Peru is small growers that previously were coca growers that were illicit. And now they produce palm, they have associations, smallholder associations, and they produce palm. And in the case of Colombia, although we also have 85% of the production, we have 60,000 smallholders, producers of palm oil, and we have big companies. Colombia is the 4th biggest producer of palm oil in the world. Independent scientific studies have shown that from 1993 to 2014, only 1% of the deforestation in Colombia came for transforming forests into palm. Where palm was planted, replacing some other crops. So rice, especially bananas, there was big banana plantations in the north were replaced for palm. So it was crop substitutions rather than deforestation. So when people think about these big but menacing agrocommodities, people have to put it in the right context to analyze why they are there, what is the history, and also what could be the solution for deforestation. And my last point is to get sustainable food system that allow us to feed the growing needs of the populations, but also maintain our natural capital, we need to think on systemic solutions that are inclusive and not exclusive. We see, for example, again, just taking the example of palm oil, that because people think that palm oil is risky, people start detaching from those from those value chains. And who are the most affected? Smallholders. So we are, by being sustainable, sometimes we are negatively impacting the livelihood of the smallholders who depend of that crop for the day-to-day living. So when we think about deforestation, it's just for everybody to think about the impact of the solutions, the impact of the decisions that we take in these far places where our commodities are produced. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, very much. And we're coming back to you later, maybe with a couple of questions or more in-depth analysis of how we can improve, but definitely what you provided us about understanding with the example of palm plantation and smallholders. And we have Garth here that would probably tell us more about the role of a producing country and the role of smallholders. So thank you so much. But let me move to Gaia. Gaia told us, I know nothing about deforestation. That's why we invited her here, because she knows nothing about deforestation, but she knows very much about science. And that's what we want to provide a very large and very broad perspective to the problem of deforestation. Exactly, Daniel, to follow what you said. And we need a greater context. And when we talk about deforestation, it's not just about sustainability, it's about anthropology, it's about people living there, it's about economy, it's about sociology, it's about psychology as well. So we try to put together in this big discussion. And here we have Gaia. Gaia as a short presentation. Gaia is based in was based in London, now is based in beautiful Florence. So Gaia works for Science for Democracy, and Science for Democracy is a think tank that's trying to design policy based on science. And the idea is there is no democracy if we have no scientific facts on which to build our policies. So thank you, Gaia, for being here with us, despite you said you know nothing about forests, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides.
Yeah.
If I managed. Oh, that's very good. So yeah, of course, I'm gonna give you a brief introduction, or let's say a step into the theoretical level of everything. So my slides are not about data, it's more about concepts, because this is what I'm doing. I just want to talk about the role of science and science that feeds the decision-making process, and what we know, I mean, from those of us that study this kind of connection, because it's really something about connection. So it is really my talk is really about a relation, a complex relation. So on one hand, we have, as you know better than me, the objective of art science, so natural science, but also risk assessment and economics and so on, is set to reduce uncertainty. So with evidence, natural science tends to reduce uncertainty and then to feed into the policy choice. So this idea of a evidence-based policy as a straight line between science, one dimension, and the policy cycle is not totally correct, because at least we are failing to take into consideration one important thing, is that we are dealing with human beings, with policy actors, and we should take into consideration the way that people think. So biases of decision makers usually are not considered in this straight connection between science and policy, and the policy cycle and policy making. So on one side, in science, uncertainty, as I said, is something positive, is considered as a positive aspect, and the typical solution that science comes with uncertainty is to try creating evidence or creating hierarchy of evidence in order to improve the supply of information to the policy process. But this kind of solution does not take into account another problem that we have on the policy dimension, which is that of ambiguity. So it is not just about solving the problem of uncertainty in science, but we also have to deal with ambiguity. And ambiguity, what is this about? Well, ambiguity really characterizes the policy dimension. So for example, it has to do with changing the definition of the policy problem, or variation over time of the venues where we search for alternatives, or actors that come and go in different venues. So ambiguity really implies instability also of the network of actors that act within the policy cycle. So ambiguity, like uncertainty in science, cannot be eliminated, but we have to deal with it somehow. So ambiguity is a key characteristic of the policy process in the democratic systems, particularly. So there are few aspects, at least, I think, that need to be acknowledged about science and policy making, having considered this different aspect of uncertainty and ambiguity. So first of all, the most frequently reported barriers of science to inform policy relates to lack of support, lack of resources, lack of time, lack of incentives for scientists to disseminate high quality information in an effective way. On the other hand, another aspect has to do with how policymakers actually think. So here, it is also a perception that policymakers rely on personal experience. They link with experts. They rely on people they know, on people they trust. So simple decision-making techniques are at place and stories are preferred rather than state-of-the-art and scientific research and sophisticated models, model systems. So some common solutions to come up, with this problems is to improve the evidence base on policy solution, is to package the evidence well in order to make it easy to be understood. So evidence has to be framed in a way that is attractive to policymakers. So discussions suggest that scientists can improve the use of evidence in policy in a relatively easy way by identifying, for instance, core group of policymakers and using the best scientific information to reduce the policymakers' uncertainty. But again, this is still a little bit oversimplistic because we have to go back to my first point. And that is that policymaking takes place in a very less ordered and predictable environment that we expect. The policymaking system is very much complex than we think, and how evidence is actually used does really not follow any straight line. So for instance, another thing that we have to consider is that well-established beliefs provide the context for policymaking. So new evidence on the effectiveness of a policy solution, they must at least come together with a shift of attention, with some kind of persuasion. In some cases, and I think we are experiencing, like it could be an economic crisis, but also a health crisis, their attention can be moved from one issue to another in a very fast and unpredictable way. So one important point, I think, is to think of ways to completely separate empirical facts from human values and way of thinking, because all individuals combine goal-driven and evidence-informed strategy with emotional judgments that are based on their established belief, on informational shortcuts, that are of course based again on familiarity with information, on the sources of information. So one, I think, interesting strategy here is framing. Framing is very important because how much attention policymakers pay, it's really also about framing. For example, fracking. Fracking, it can really be portrayed as a new energy boom, or it can really be framed as an environmental disaster. So framing the policy is also really important. So again, the point that I really takeaway point for you today is this one. It is really not just about in the hands of scientists. Scientific evidence, of course, plays a big part in this process, but we should not also exaggerate on the ability of scientists to win at the end of the day with making reference to their evidence. So again, this strategy of framing is very important and does not, I think, but this is also something we find in the literature, does not receive enough attention. So how to do that? Just practitioners, they can adopt some strategies to increase the demand for evidence. They can combine facts with emotional appeals or tell simple stories that are easy to understand, or to acknowledge and deal with people biases. Or to interpret even new evidence through the theoretical lens of pre-existing beliefs that actors, of course, have. We should also, I think, I should also highlight that this might not work, or it might take years to support or to have some kind of impact on this kind of framing for evidence-based policy solutions. So to conclude at least my first part, what scientists should do. And I'm looking also at my fellow speakers today. Scientists have in front of them a choice to make between the need to specialize and to maintain an image of academic objectivity, or they can move a little bit beyond their comfort zone and their expertise, and they can engage in increasing their impact. And this is the advocacy part, because policymakers, without this kind of advocacy, they will rely on highly biased, on very persuasive stories from vested interests sometimes, rather than struggling through a very hard to understand scientific papers. This is the fact. So for scholars in areas such as environmental, natural, physical science, we require new skills, I think. So the ability to turn this large amount of evidence into simple, effective stories that appeal the biases of policymakers, and also to form alliances with the key actors in the government. And then, of course, these skills, they have to go hand in hand with some pragmatism, because we need to accept that policymakers have different backgrounds, they have different training, they do not think like scientists, and they also face very different pressures and also timings. So what is really required is a dialogue, to establish a thoughtful dialogue about the different responsibilities of each set of actors and their practices, their constituencies. There might be ways to improve these links between the two dimensions by, for instance, networking and cooperation, but for sure, and this is just my last input for now, is that there is really much to be gained from a even closer collaboration, but based on different set of incentives for both groups, for both dimensions. And
thank you,
so
Gaia. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. You know, I hate to interrupt you very much, but we have two other speakers to go. And you mentioned advocacy, and earlier Daniel has also mentioned. Thank you very much for turning away the presentation. You also mentioned with Daniel earlier the role of smallholders. So before going actually to the policymaker that Gaia you have just referred to, and that's the representative of the European Commission, let me turn to Gert. Gert works with Solidaridad, and I've always been fascinated by Solidaridad, because one of my key points was about European policies. Can European policies that are designed for 500 million people approximately can, you know, have an impact worldwide? And how do we do that? And we figure out that there are these smallholders. As an Italian, this smallholder word doesn't really make a sense. Okay, we don't have these words smallholders, but I learned to understand what the smallholders are and their importance. So Gert, thanks for being here with us. Tell us more about the role of smallholders in preventing deforestation, and how countries like Europe and producing countries that Felipe and Daniel mentioned earlier can work together to reduce deforestation.
Thank you, Pietro. Also, thanks for organizing this meeting. I think it's really timely, not only because of we are on Earth Day, but also because we are 2 months before the presentation of the European Commission's proposal on deforestation, focusing on deforestation-free supply chains. And that's also where part of my presentation will be focusing on. My name is Gert van der Bijl. I'm the EU policy advisor at Solidaridad. As Pietro mentioned, we are an international development organization working on sustainability and supply chains in around 40 countries around the globe, including work on palm oil, beef, cocoa, and coffee. So some of the most important deforestation commodities, working with farmers, focusing on smallholders, and seeking cooperation throughout the supply chain to improve sustainability. I indeed think it is important to focus on the role of producing countries, also when designing European policies. And that's related to the question I want to throw in to start with. Do we want to realize deforestation-free supply chains, or do we want to reduce deforestation? And I repeat, do we want to reduce deforestation, or do we want to focus on deforestation-free supply chains? That's not necessarily the same, but it can be combined. And let me explain. The reality, and maybe that's the inconvenient truth where this meeting is about, is that when we talk about deforestation, we are talking about a real complex problem. And one of the characteristics of complex problems is that there are no simple solutions. reducing deforestation from agricultural expansion is about transforming agriculture, and that's in the end where the focus should be. And that requires proper coordination between governments, private sector, civil society, and farmers, combining incentives coming from the markets with long-term engagement with farmers on the ground, including access to training and credit. Because at the end of the day, it's only farmers that can change farming, and farmers are the only ones that can really contribute to reducing deforestation. And indeed, local actors in producing countries are important. Danielle and Felipe already mentioned developments in South America and Asia. In South America, we recently see deforestation going up, certainly in Brazil. But in the past, we saw deforestation in the Amazon region in Brazil going down by 70%, as much as 70% between 2004 and 2012, 2014, showing that reduction of deforestation is possible when the right incentives are there. I think mentioning the Amazon, it's important to add that when we talk about deforestation from soy in Brazil, most of the expansion of soy in nature, in areas important for nature, is not in the Amazon area, but is taking place in the Cerrado, the eastern part of the country. And I hope that when we talk about European policies, Mr. Schally can also indicate that ecosystems like the Cerrado and the Chaco will be included in the EU proposal. Developments are not on the right pace in South America, like Danielle said. And Felipe mentioned that in Southeast Asia, we see the opposite movement. In 2016, deforestation in Indonesia peaked at 800,000 hectares per year. And in 2020, it was as much as 70% lower. Again, showing the importance of giving the right signals, the right governance, and also showing that reducing deforestation is possible. I think it's important, as also Danielle indicated, or no, it was Felipe, that only part of this expansion was related to palm oil. Estimates are that in 2020, 20% of the deforestation in Indonesia was related to palm oil. Still important, but also a lot of other developments related. And again, it is important to stress that government policies, concerted efforts by industry, NGOs, and government, together giving the right signals, are key to reduce deforestation. And that brings me to the role of Europe. In the markets of coffee and cocoa, Europe is still a dominant player worldwide. In cocoa, I think it's around 60% that Europe imports from what is traded globally. But for the main deforestation commodities like beef, soy, and palm oil, Europe is not a dominant player. For soy and palm, EU imports are less than 10% of global production. Most of it is used domestically or goes to China or India. So that means that we can focus on freeing our supply chain from deforestation only and introduce very strict requirements on traceability in isolation, but that may feel good, but is not necessarily going to have a lot of impact on deforestation. As what may happen is that those that deforest, and including smallholders, will continue doing so, but without access to the European markets. And for instance, European companies may change sourcing to regions like the US, where deforestation is less of an issue. And in the field of soy, I do hear a lot of companies say, well, maybe if deforestation is going to be really something that will be checked on strictly, we will move to buying from the US. And I think it's important, Danielle and Felipe already stressed so, to focus also on the position of smallholders. Smallholders produce an important part of deforestation-related commodities. In palm oil, it's around 40%, and in cocoa, coffee, and rubber, between 70 until as much as 90% of production is coming from smallholders. So if we focus too much on strict access and traceability requirements that are difficult to meet for smallholders only, the risk is that smallholders lose access to markets in Europe just because of the cost of compliance. So ensuring that deforestation regulations are smallholder inclusive is really essential, not only to support the livelihood of smallholders, but also to be effective in reducing deforestation at the end of the day. So if we forget about smallholders, we may realize deforestation-free supply chains, but without really reducing deforestation. A successful transformation in the end is what is needed, and that is about creating a new economic perspective for smallholders and farming communities and working in a way that does not require or reduces deforestation. At the moment, in a lot of places on this world, forests are hard to maintain because the trees are worth more standing than cleared. So we need to change the economic dynamics behind that. And also I think Europe and European policies can play a role in that by building effective financial mechanisms, including climate funding, to offset opportunity costs of keeping forests standing. And we cannot expect producing countries to be responsible for bearing this cost alone. By supporting and working together with producing countries, we can contribute to transform the system in a way that does not only create islands of excellence, but towards a system that leaves no one behind, covering all producers. And that does not mean that as Europe, I think we should not focus on deforestation-free supply chains or that we should water down ambitions. On the contrary, I think the importance is to combine raising the bar and raising the floor. So work together with producing countries, also realize that they have an important role and that they do contribute already, like the example of Indonesia shows. So an EU initiative can be transformative and combine deforestation-free supply chains with actual reduction of deforestation if we find the right ways to cooperate with producing countries and include cooperation with companies and civil society on both sides of the ocean. And in that way, we can combine reducing deforestation and deforestation-free supply chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gert. Let me move very quickly because we're really running out of time and we still have one round, a few questions to answer. I want to turn to Brussels and particularly to Hugo-Maria Schally, who's the head of Unit Multilateral Environmental Cooperation at the European Commission. Hugo, thank you for joining us today. We heard a lot, and particularly I like what Gert said earlier. There are no simple solution, and I know the European Union is working on a very, very, very ambitious plan, and probably many of the people that are here with us today are really looking forward to watch and to read this and to reading this documents that the European Union is preparing. I'm sure you know much more than you will tell us, but I'm very provocative. But I want to leave you the floor to sort of sum up what you guys are doing, and particularly what you think about what was said earlier today and this, very big effort of trying to, combine and also work, because one of the main critics, Hugo, that we get from producing countries or countries that are accused of deforesting the most is Europe does the policies but never engages with us. Your floor, Hugo.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to my co-panelists for a very rich and a diverse discussion already now. And I think that I can only say that the work that we've done in the EU on issues related to deforestation confirms very much that this is complex. There is no simple solution, but we have, as a European Union, a responsibility to contribute to the solution. because we are also part of the problem. Because whether or not we want to sort of to accept it, the EU is a significant consumer of a lot of the products that may be associated with deforestation and forest degradation. Having said that, it's also clear that a major part of deforestation and forest degradation is associated with consumption in other parts of the world. And there's a lot of subsistence farming and subsistence agriculture that is linked to deforestation and forest degradation as well. So when you look at the way we have dealt with deforestation and forest degradation in the EU, it's fair to say that we are looking back at 20 years of rather intense policy discussion and action around deforestation. And we started off by looking at a very specific concept, forest law enforcement, governance and trade, which led to the EU flagged action plan in 2003, which led to 2 pieces of legislation that we are implementing since then. We had the 2008 communication on deforestation, very much couching it in terms of climate change and how forests would play a role in the CO2 cycle. But all of that, I think all this policy tools that we've put in place clearly led us to the conclusion that this was not enough. Our contribution to the problem continued to grow, and the deforestation continued on, I would say, globally, perhaps sometimes decreasing, but it continued to be a problem. Very clearly, that led to the way we have described our approach to the problem in the 2019 communication, which is saying, and I'm coming back to Gert, we need to look at our part, our contribution, which is the demand side. And although we agree that demand side measures will not solve the problem, it is an important part because it is a part that demonstrates that we take our own responsibilities seriously. And I think that allows us to talk to partners across the world in a way saying, we're doing our homework, what about you? And here I'm not talking about producer countries, I'm talking about other consumption markets. And they have been mentioned, China, we talk about Japan, we talk about India and others. Now, of course, the second part, and that has also been highlighted, we need to be a partner for those countries where those commodities are being produced. And let's face the fact, we produce some of those commodities ourselves. So I think there is deforestation in Europe as well. And that was the second element of the 2019 communication, which is engaging with countries across the world, integrating that in our cooperation activities, integrating it into our outreach. And I think that we've done an enormous amount of that already, and we're going to step it up. I think that in all fairness, what countries say that one or the other partner doesn't engage with them, sometimes it's also the other way around. We have a number of countries that are not keen to engage with us. And I think there's a big country in Latin America to which that would apply. Now, the third element is, of course, the work in international fora and the use of other policy tools in that regard. Here, talk about not least about trade policy and multilateral policies, and here we are also engaging very much. Then also to say, okay, what are the science and monitoring tools that we can enlist? There's a lot out there that we can actually see how can we actually get to the facts on what is behind deforestation and what are the trends. All that together means that what has been alluded to is one part of the equation. It will address our part of the problem and the fact that we want to encourage businesses and investors in Europe to do the right thing and to make sure that those products don't come to the EU market, which I think is very different from saying those products are inherently deforestation related. Some of those may be, some of them might not be. So I think we will put in place an approach that allows the producer countries and those who want to place it on the EU market to prove that specific commodities are not linked to deforestation and forest degradation. Now, I think that you have to see it, and I think here I again agree with everything that's been said, in a bigger context. You know, we have the European Green Deal. We're trying to bring about a transformation in the EU, and we're trying to be among the leading voices in the world to bring about that transformation internationally, working with others. And I think that this year, 2021, has three really great opportunities to bring that to the world stage. It's COP26 of UNFCCC, it's COP15 of the CBD, and it's the Sustainable Food Systems Summit under the auspices of the Secretary General of the UN. All these can pass important messages in that regard. And I think that focusing on the role that agriculture and agricultural production and expansion can play in the economic development, in the social development, and in addressing the environmental externalities in countries around the world is key to this. And I think that we are working in that direction in all those fora. So I think that we are obviously glad that our proposal attracts a lot of attention. But let's face it, with regard to the big issue of deforestation, it's one element of the solution. Engaging with producer countries is another element of the solution. Creating the global multilateral framework of commitments and obligations is the third part of the puzzle. So I think we're looking at a complex solution to a complex problem where we are there to engage with the different communities of stakeholders all along the way. And I think that getting the facts and the figures right is one part that is quite important. And I can tell you in doing the impact assessment of the proposal that we're currently working on, this is an amazing journey on through these vast amount of data and evidence that we have, of that we actually have to sort of put aside some of the undergrowth to keep in forest terms and to look at what's really there. And it's always interesting then when you do such a impact assessment that just when you are in the final stages, new studies pop up right, left, and center that suddenly prove one thing or the other that may be convenient to one or the other pressure group in that regard. All of those studies are valuable, but we have to put them all together and see where we find our way. But I can assure you that there is no illusion and there is no attempt in the Commission to say, well, by dealing with the demand side, we've done our part, goodbye very much, that's it. I think we are fully engaged at all levels, at the demand side, at the supply side, at the multilateral side, to bring the world to discuss this necessary transition. And I think a transition for agriculture is key to this. It's agricultural expansion that has been the main driver of deforestation, forest degradation over the last 20 years. We need to address that, and we want to be a constructive part of that transition that we hope we can do with the EU, with the partner countries, be they consumer countries or producer countries, and in multilateral fora. And I think that there is no easy way out. There's a lot of work to be done, but you have to take one step at a time. And the first step will be putting our own house in order so that we can actually provide a good market for those commodities that avoid being linked to deforestation and forest degradation, to encourage the consumption of those commodities, but to send a clear message to our own businesses and to our investment and finance sector that investment in certain agricultural expansion or production projects is not a good idea in the eyes of the European legislator and regulator. I think I'll stop here because I think there's much more to say, but there will be a second round. And I'm sure that colleagues and probably people from the audience have a lot of things to say about that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Hugo, and thank you for your role and what you're playing, and again explaining the role of the European Union, that of course is to be acknowledged for taking the leadership in this incredible journey as you define it, but it's also very tricky and very complicated journey. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to make it work. And hopefully here with the Sustainable Nutrition Platform, we can, for our little brick, we can contribute with this. Let's have a very, very quick second round, because otherwise, as I said earlier, we are consuming a lot of oxygen here, hopefully in a smart way. We have not been so short as we should have been. We love the smart brevity approach, but let's go back to Felipe and again, do a quick round. There's also the question and answer. I saw several questions. I didn't in purpose answer to some that were asking, are the slides available? Because if I say yes, they are available, then you don't follow anymore. Well, the slides, the few slides that we have will be made available if of course, the speaker will agree with that, and they will be available on our website, or you can contact us and we'll share them with you together with a recording that will be again available online. There was a question for Felipe. There were a bunch of also comments by Peter Van Dijk, and he brought more than the question. He brought essays, so feel free to read them. Felipe, I'm coming back to you after what Hugo said. What will be the impact of the European policies, or what will be the future European policies on deforestation, and what should, according to you and the Tropical Forest Alliance, Europe do in order to reduce or help reducing deforestation?
Thank you, Pietro. Fantastic input from everyone. I think this is a very constructive conversation. Before going into your question, I think it's important to be aware that this is a global problem, right? I made a reference to the future of forest risk commodities, and just to correct a figure, its consumption is expected to increase in 48%. It's a doubling of the rate of increase in human population. So we are really, every one of us, it's taking more and more. And that's the elephant in the room, right? And I think Hugo is referring to that the problem goes beyond the current markets and goes into the emerging markets and has to be tackled. Now, the way we go about shaping policy tools and instruments in the demand side, on the producer side, and the multilateral mechanisms, it will set the tone of how this goes. And there is what I would like to phrase as the burden of leadership. Whenever you lead, you have to be, if you go into this forest and you lead, somebody has to open the forest cover, right? It's the way it works. So the EU is taking the leadership on the subject, and the way the EU is about defining and doing the architecture and design of its legislation, which, as Hugo says, has to focus primarily on their own immediate problem, which is how to control, not be part of the chain of impact. That will send a trend globally. The EU has been speaking about, forest partnership structures. There's the issue how to go about the certification instruments within the logic of due diligence. Due diligence has many variables so that we could tap into market instruments to make sure this becomes efficient in order to avoid these systematic challenges that Daniel was referring to, which you can actually end up throwing aside, if I might use that harsh term, smallholders from the supply chains. So the way this effort gets developed ends up being very important beyond the EU borders, right? And I wanted to stress that out. And as Bert mentioned, it goes beyond just how to shape an instrument that allows you to avoid importing deforestation, but rather making sure that there's a chain of impact, of positive impact to halt deforestation. Just speaking of what Gaia mentioned, we in the Tropical Forest Alliance went into the tools and the power of dialogue, of communication, and were able to mobilize multi-stakeholder forces, private organizations, civil society organizations from different levels, traders, retailers, and many of them that have very diverse opinions, and create a position paper which reflects a commitment to be part of the solution moving forward. And I think that's important, and that's the way we can go to the other level that Hugo was referring to, right? How do we tap into the producer countries? How do we tap into the multilateral mechanisms so that we can do that bridging? Even with Hugo, we worked in how to send the message to spaces in China. So I think that the collective force might be the route for us to take. I know it's easier said than done, but how do we build the real structures to have that collective force so that we turn around the tide? And if we do that, and I just want to conclude making a reference, probably you're going to hear about this if you haven't heard already, it depends on your time zone, that today on the Earth Day, there's a financial alliance with the world's biggest banks, asset owners, asset managers, and insurers aligning themselves to mobilize trillions around the climate change agenda. And when we see land use as the most pressing component on that agenda, on the, we have to connect the dots. We have to collectively make sure that the conditions lead to change. And I would like to think that we should praise the leadership of the EU and jump in to work together to have the most balanced system that allows to achieve a high and quick mainstreaming and upscaling of the solution. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Felipe, and also for being here with us from Central and South America. And we look forward to having you back in Geneva, in Switzerland, and probably meet you in person. Gert, talking to and connecting to what Felipe said, and moving and helping the European Union, but one of the risks that was Hugo mentioned as well is when countries don't listen and don't talk to each other, then the risk is that Europe develops and design one legislation or one policy, but then those countries are not engaged, and they go and sell their commodities somewhere else where there are much lower level of sustainability. So the question is, how can we engage as Europeans? How can we engage producing countries, and particularly how can we engage with farmers and smallholders?
Yeah, thank you, Pietro. Good question. Yeah, well, first of all, Hugo-Maria was referring to one country where it's very difficult to connect with, that is not really interested in working with us. And of course, there it's difficult. But in that same country, there are initiatives at state level, also together with international actors and companies, like in Mato Grosso, the PCI, the Produce, Conserve and Include initiatives that could be an example of what can be done together with such a country. And on the other hand, there are, I think, good examples of cooperation already there. And when we talk about producing countries in the main deforestation commodities, yeah, it's mostly about 10, 15 major countries that are really key. The EU has set up a good cooperation with Ghana and Ivory Coast, the cocoa talks that are really addressing the issue in a holistic way. So including discussions about living income of smallholders and deforestation. And I think that's a very good example of how a good dialogue could look like. Also including the responsibility of the private sector and what both national governments and the European Commission can do. So I hope that can be a good example in other regions as well. In Southeast Asia, for palm oil, there is the EU Asian joint working group on palm oil that is starting to develop, also taking a broad approach, including focusing on research and connecting also with the private sector, also using national standards and acknowledging what is being done in the country itself. And I think those are good examples that need to be further developed. And what I do think that can help is also the important link between deforestation and climate change. A lot of these countries have and are still developing NDCs to reduce climate emissions, and deforestation is an important part there. Solidaridad, together with IDH, the Sustainable Trade Initiatives, we have worked on and are still working on national initiatives for climate smart palm oil farmers based on MOUs with Malaysia, Indonesia, Ghana, and Nigeria, MOUs between these countries and the Netherlands, very much starting on what is needed in those countries in the NDCs to reduce climate gas emissions, and then translating that to activities in landscapes, to work with smallholders, to promote climate smart palm oil production. I think that is also an example that can be replicated in other regions and with other commodities, showing that a cooperation with, let's say, a positive agenda can work here, and that we can move away from just raising the fingers and telling countries what they should not do, but work on a joint positive agenda. And I think that can be done.
Thank you, Gerd. And this is one of the most important messages that I want to share. First of all, thanks to you, Felipe and Daniel, for the incredible work you're doing to support this initiative in favor of sustainability. But as you said, today should be a thoughtful day, not to say what is wrong, but to say what we could do to improve our living and our journey on this planet. Daniel, I wanted to come to you and then to move to Gaia very briefly, and then back to Hugo to conclude, because we have a bunch of questions. And Mr. Shelby, if you want to read some of the questions that are already there, so that we can speed up the process. Daniel, earlier you talked about the example of palm oil as a positive example. Are there other best practice in Central America that you could mention, or that you could tell us that can also be a benchmark for other commodities or other practices in around the world, in the tropical area particularly?
Yes, thank you. I have like 3 examples to share. You know, I think today is Earth Day, so we have talked a lot about the complexity and the situation that we are in, but it's good to put a little bit of hope as to what is happening. And one is technology. Technology is allowing to have greater transparency wherever we are. And I think that has to be put to good use. And so how do we keep value chains accountable? And for example, there is in Guatemala, there is an alliance with global service providers to map all the farms that are related to a specific commodity production and track in real time deforestation. And it's not managed by the individual companies, it's managed by the federation that groups all the companies that are in that sector, making this agreement with this global service provider, using information that can be, analyzed and checked by, clients, customers, stakeholders, government. So, using the science that we have available right now for ensuring transparency and accountability on a specific supply chain. That's something that is already, in motion in Guatemala. The same thing can be done with, open source tools that are right now available. But transparency through use of technology is one big thing. The other is sectoral commitments. And I think the commitment of the sector in producing countries is key. And I want to drive a little bit south, going back to Colombia and going back, to palm oil. But for example, the National Palm Oil Federation, FEDEPALMA, has been explicit over and over again but for them, there are two things for the sector. One, no palm oil in the Amazon. Colombia has enough area where palm oil can be grown. No palm oil in the Amazon, no plantations, no palm oil mills. No, Amazon out of the palm oil equation. 2, use only the areas that have already been classified as suitable for agricultural production that is called the agricultural frontier. Palm oil only in the agricultural frontier, which means no expansion in, affecting forests to put palm, but it's just whatever already there are other crops. That's where you can do intensification or replacement of crops. So I think, for example, the action of federations in a pre-competitive collaboration in general, I think it's going to be super powerful. Going a little bit, higher, talking about pre-competitive collaboration, for example, a lot of companies are now joining to talk about how they can work together. I've been part, for example, of a process that TFA helped us lead in Colombia to make voluntary agreements for zero deforestation, net deforestation supply chains for beef, milk, cocoa, palm oil. So, for example, that's bringing together governments, private sector, civil society, and those groups to talk about what they can do together, because complex situations demand complex solutions, and it's only working together that we can go farther, faster, but together. And I think that's, for me, that's the most important piece.
Daniel, very briefly, because there's a question that goes to Hugo later on, but I can ask you as well. Are certification schemes a good tool to reduce and prevent deforestation, like the RSPO or the Soil Roundtable?
Yes, in a short, but it's not the silver bullet. It's not the only mechanism. Certification is a means to an end. The end is sustainability and sustainable food system. That's the end goal. Any type of certification can help. We have seen producers that start with, traditional ISO, and that gives them structure, internal control systems. That's one piece. The next step, they go for, ISCC. Then from ISCC, they go to RSPO. I think in general, all certifications bring value because they put focus on a company to think of specific elements and a continuous improvement model. So for me, certification, yes, but certification doesn't replace the enabling conditions that deal with the legality and the governance that happens in our territories.
Thanks. And first, you said something very interesting. You said that palm oil, for instance, should not expand to the Amazon forest. But when we have such a high demand that is increasing, as Felipe showed earlier, don't you see a risk that we don't have enough land for that demand?
I see the debate and I see the questions, but for example, we have areas that are not used to their full potential. We have 21 million hectares dedicated to pasture in Colombia, and according to research done, the current cattle population could be using 7 of that. So that means that we have an excess of land that could be put to other good use. So I think, and it also requires concentration to have, a system that is economically, interesting for the investors. So I think, yeah, I think there are enough lands, enough degraded lands, and enough agricultural lands already in our countries to think that should be the first target instead of changing forests for other type of land use.
Thanks. And particularly productivity is one of the key chain, is how we can make commodities or plantation or agriculture more productive thanks to technology or thanks to new techniques. Before ending with Hugo, Gaia, you said something very interesting. I saw there were a couple of questions for you. You might answer as well later on after our seminar, because perhaps they go beyond our scope today. You mentioned about science, you mentioned about the importance of policymaker and how scientists, our guests today, can also advocate, their facts and data in order to be more, active or activist and contribute not just to produce data, but also to change policies. You said the right to science. What is the right to science, and how can this help in promoting sustainability?
Yeah, thank you. I will very brief. So let's start with the right to science. This is really relates to holding government accountable how they deliver on science. So the right to science is defined as the right that everyone has to participate and enjoy the benefits of scientific progress. And this right also of course, impose obligations on governments, for example, to provide education and non-discrimination in accessing the benefits of scientific innovations. We found the right to science in the guidance of the General Comment number 25, published by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And the General Comment is articulating a series of elements that impose duties to states, such as the one to facilitate the participation of citizens to the scientific process. And I think this is an important point that I wanted to end with, because we have two aspects that are important to build trust in science and credibility on the policies that are based on scientific evidence. And one is, of course, about engagement. And I think that more than anything else today, also the webinar has highlighted the multiple dimensions that have to be taken into account to form decisions, and also in relation to reconstruct the link with stakeholders and citizens about science and science-informed policies, and the importance on continuous forms of deliberation that should be, of course, fostered, and multi-channel strategies that should be put into place to engage even more stakeholders and citizens. And my last point is about good evidence that is necessary, of course, to inform the design of policies, but also to implement and evaluate then the policies. We talked about impact assessment just a few minutes ago. And for us, for those who study public policy, the question is to investigate whether, for instance, governments have good evidence and what informations are used, and whether policymakers also have the skills to manage the evaluation of evidence. And this also relates to the need then to put in place and to foster some data governance strategies across governments. And I think this is all from me.
Thank you, Gaia. Thank you so much, because you also help us providing a different perspective, and particularly the role of science. And as we said, and we saw along this discussion, it's very important to have a more articulated and then broader perspective over issue. Hugo, I'm back to you. There were a bunch of questions. One was relating to the role of certification, if the EU and you guys are considering certification as a valid tool. The other one was by Matteo here. Is a double question. He said mostly things are done, but could you please tell us more about the public certification scheme? But he's also asking which are the aspects that the EU Commission is still a bit uncertain of. Actually, the question is really the EU Commission uncertain of something? I'm provoking you, Hugo.
Thank you, Pietro. And yes, uncertainty is a major driver of innovation, because if we're certain of everything, we would know exactly what we would be doing. And I think I go back to Gaia's very valid point about how to actually use evidence and how to process scientific data and evidence so that it is truly supportive to public policy intervention. And I think that you have to toe a very fine line between disregarding evidence and falling into paralysis by analysis, because those are the two things that we're always sort of in danger of, that analysis can never be enough, and there is never enough evidence to move or to move too quickly. I think mostly the Commission has never been accused of moving too quickly. We actually take our time, and those who follow public policy at the EU level closer, we have this regulatory scrutiny board that is rigorous and sometimes brutal in its analysis of what we are presenting. So we are usually already completely exhausted by the time we reach the public with our proposals, but at least we are fairly certain, going back to Pietro's point. I think that before we have had that interaction with the regulatory scrutiny board, we cannot be certain of anything. So I don't think I want to expand on that one. I think on private certification, I think we are running in parallel to impact assessment. We are running a study on the experiences with certification systems covering wood and wood products, because there are quite a number of challenges for certification systems, and we continue to be fairly cautious in the assessment of their utility. But the experience that we have made is, in the context of the EU timber regulation, yes, they can be useful as one possible element in the assessment of whether there is risk, in that case of illegality, in wood and wood products, but they never are the whole truth. So one thing I'm fairly certain is, and I think I'm not sure now whether Felipe or Daniel said it already, they cannot replace public policy intervention, and they cannot replace good governance and strong enforcement in the producer country. They can mitigate some of the effects, but they cannot replace it. And I think that's one thing that I'm already certain of before I even finish that study. I think that there are a few things that caught my attention in the discussion, and I just want to come back to it. One was and also in the questions, why only focusing on tropical forests? The 2019 communication tried to be very careful in sending the message that we're looking at forests globally and not only on tropical forests. And what we're looking now is trying to make sure that what we will propose will be a framework that will address all kinds of deforestation linked to specific commodities, but also to be dynamic and flexible enough to perhaps look into other commodities that we might come up saying, okay, we're not advanced enough in our assessment at this point in time to include them, because we will have a limited number of commodities to start off from, but we may want to add others further on. Now, second, I'll a little bit go back to Gert's question on scope. I think that what we had been asked to do was to look at something that would look at the demand, at the consumption footprint on deforestation. So forests will be our primary focus of analysis. But again, this for us is probably just a stepping stone, and we need to see how it works. And I think that we also need to bear in mind, where do we have the data, the monitoring system, and the evidence that could support such a compliance system in that regard. And I think for forests, we have a lot of data and evidence on that one. On other fragile ecosystems, I'm not so sure. So I think that's some things that we're fairly uncertain of. I think that there was also a question of, how do we process information? How do we deal with that information? And how do we then take that as a basis for engaging with partner countries? And what kind of productive partnerships would be established with them to help with the transition that I think everybody is interested in? And the issue here is we are looking in the context of the impact assessment, looking at the countries that may be impacted most by a measure that we would put in place. First criteria. Second criteria, a country that is most affected by a need to make a transition from one mode of agricultural production and expansion to another one. And I think that will sort of determine how in our external partnership policies we will engage with individual countries or groups of countries. Now, then there are the countries that actually, and I think I'll talk about countries that for political or other reasons don't wish to do that. And here, of course, we have a problem. And I think that not to name our main worry in that regard, which is one of Colombia's neighboring countries, how to deal with that. I think that the offer will be there, but we can't force anybody. But we hope, for instance, in the context of the G7 and the G20, to find partners with whom we can team up to make that, saying that there's not just us, there are more consumers that want to do that. Because very often, and I think I'm wondering whether that is something that you would want to comment on, is I often hear if 10% of your supply raises its standards, it already becomes economically interesting to raise your standards overall, because then you avoid the need for segregation and a whole kind of cost factors in that regard. And I hope that by engaging with a number of other consumer countries, we can achieve that. But that doesn't take away the need to engage with the countries and with the sectors, be it the business and the societal sectors that may actually be ready to move, while the government may not be ready to move. And here, probably regional and local initiatives can play a role, because what we want to ensure is, if somebody can prove that his supply chain is not associated with deforestation, should not be blocked for bringing his products to the EU. I think that when you look at the structure of production, and I think Felipe used some graphs in his slides, you can see that we have a specific problem in Latin America with deforestation linked to commodity production, whereas in parts of Africa, if that was my right interpretation of that slide, and I apologize if it was Daniel, but I mean, I think it was you, Felipe, there is mainly a link to shifting agriculture, which very often is linked to subsistence farming. So I think the structure is very different. So I think also the partnership will have to account for that. Going back to Gert's point, you can actually use trade tools and demand side tools for some of the issues, but they may not work for some others in that regard. So again, we need to be careful what commodities we target and how we actually use demand side, but how to couple that with the partnership instruments that we would have under development cooperation in terms of selecting the right countries and the right regions. But again, we depend on the political will of the partner country to engage with us in that. So there's a limited. We will, of course, try to use trade policy as well. So the whole discussion about Mercosur, we will try to use. And then I have to say, we have partners in Latin America that have a very productive and positive approach to this, at least in the interaction with us. And I'm happy to say Colombia is one of those countries that actually takes a positive approach. So we can engage with them very well. There is also, when I look at countries, Peru also gives signal that it wants to engage. So I think it's not black and white. There are opportunities in that regard. Now, I think I want to close with reflecting on one discussion that I've heard, which saying, well, we are growing, we need more agricultural production that may lead to more land use. And there I go back to all the figures we have about the developments in Brazil under the Lula government, where deforestation was going down, and agricultural production was going up. So more was produced with the same or even less land. So the whole rhetoric of we need to expand into the Amazon because we need to produce, just the facts aren't there if we talk about demystifying. And I think that there is clearly a message to say, if you want to make the transition to a way of an agricultural system that perhaps is built on the idea of sustainable intensification, there is a way out with regard to avoiding land conversion. But I think that's obviously right now a message that is not welcome in Brazil at all. But I think we will continue to make that point in all the conversations we have. So I'm going to stop here. I hope I have addressed the questions that you felt I should address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugo, for addressing all the questions and actually going beyond. So now what we can do is just waiting for your work to be made visible and public, and we would be happy then to try to, of course, participate in the debate. I hope, and I want to thank first Gaia for being here with us, Felipe, Gert, Daniel, and of course you, Hugo, for taking part to this discussion that I hope it was thoughtful and insightful, and contributed, as Hugo said at the end, to team up, to come up together, to an optimistic message based on facts and scientific evidence. That's why we're here. That's why we created the Sustainable Nutrition Platform, is to work together with everybody else and contribute to this amazing and incredible challenge that is ahead of us. It's the Earth Day, and I think we should enjoy the Earth in our best way, producing some good oxygen and not producing too much CO2 as I did for the past 2 hours. I hope you enjoy with us. Our speakers, of course, will be available for any question, and we'll be happy to transfer this question to them, unless you don't want to reach out to them directly. I hope we will be able to work together again in the close future. The event is being recorded. You probably receive an email to watch again the webinar if you want, or if you have missed part of it, you will be able to continue watching it. From the Sustainable Nutrition Platform, I'm Pietro Paganini. I want to thank you, everybody, and good luck and good evening or good day, wherever you are. Thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. And thanks to the audience, and thanks to Diana as well, that has done a tremendous job in putting you together as well and helping creating this wonderful seminar. To the audience, they've been here for a long time, and in a lockdown almost closing, having so many people, it's amazing. Huh? I'm not sure I was able to stay for almost 2 hours, to be honest. Thanks, guys. Enjoy your time back in South America. I think Hugo was referring to Panama. Am I right? To the small land of Panama.
I think so.
Great country, Panama.
Yeah, it's one of those.
You were referring to Panama.
Yeah, one of those small countries in Latin America. Yes.
No offense to our Panama friends. Thank you, guys. I'm closing here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.